Daniel chapter 11. Last time we looked at chapter 10 together. We also looked through the first few verses of chapter 11 as well, and we understood that as kind of a preface or an opening act leading into the fullness of this fourth amazing vision that the Lord showed Daniel here that we have recorded for us. So in chapter 10, we found Daniel spending, it said, 21 days there in mourning and in prayer. And that time came to an end because an angel came to him with the answer to his prayers, while also revealing that he would have been there sooner if he had not been delayed. He told Daniel that Daniel's prayer had been heard immediately in heaven. He says, when you started to pray, as soon as that first day that you prayed, heaven heard. And the angel revealed that he had been sent right away to Daniel, but he gave Daniel and he gave us as well a glimpse into the spiritual world around us by telling us and telling Daniel that the prince of the kingdom of Persia had withstood the angel 21 days, and he only got through that roadblock in the spiritual realm because Michael the archangel came to his aid. An amazing look for us into spiritual warfare and the concept that there are indeed spiritual hierarchies and levels and demonic forces, principalities and powers, and so on, that they themselves apparently are concerned oftentimes quite specifically with particular assignments, regions, peoples, and activities on the earth. It was a great picture then of the faithful character of Daniel as well. We've learned a lot from him in this book, I hope. But a great picture of his faithful character again, in that he had no idea for all of those 21 days. Daniel had no idea what was going on. He had no idea why there seemed to be no answer from God for his prayers over those 3 weeks, and yet Daniel consistently prayed and persistently prayed for those 21 days. And so that's why the 21 days came to an end. We talked about that. It wasn't that he had said, I'm going to pray for 21 days. It was that he had started to pray, and he kept on praying. And the prayers ended when the answer came, and it took 21 days for that to take place. And so we're also shown throughout the Scriptures that important principle for us as followers of the Lord, persistent, faithful prayer. We're shown that not only in the life of Daniel and his example, but we also see it particularly from the words of Jesus himself, that faithful and persistent prayer is crucial in the spiritual warfare that is going on all around us. That being said, we saw that Daniel was completely overwhelmed at the first part of the vision that he saw. The first part of the vision was a glorious heavenly man that he saw there, and Daniel says that that man spoke to him. After that, he said that an angel touched him and explained the 21-day delay that we already talked about, and that Daniel was still greatly affected and weakened and actually quite terrified by the presence of the angelic ones there, the sight of the heavenly man and what he was saying, all that he was being shown. And so the angel there encouraged Daniel, saying, O man greatly beloved, fear not. Peace be to you. Be strong. Yes, be strong. And as it said there, Daniel was strengthened. The angel told him that he was going to return to the fight against the prince of Persia, that the angel was, but that he would reveal to Daniel the truth about things to come first. And so in the first few verses of chapter 11, the angel began to do that very thing, telling Daniel that there would be 3 more kings in the Persian Empire there after the reign of King Cyrus, in which Daniel currently lived at the time of this vision. And that after those 3 kings, the angel said the next one would stir up kind of the angry attention of the quickly rising realm of Greece to the west. And that he said that that king would do so through his riches. History reveals that to be the case, telling us that the Persian king Artaxerxes waged a kind of economic warfare against the rising Greek Empire. The king prior to him, it was just Xerxes the first, and there had been military conflict between him leading the Persians and the Greeks rising as a power. And the Greeks had won some of those early battles, and so Artaxerxes went this other route using his riches, as the angel said that he would. Using his riches, and specifically he did that by funding many of Greece's enemies all around them, rather than taking them on militarily again like the prior king had done. And so there's an amazing details that we have there fulfilled. The angel then prophesied that a mighty king would eventually rise up in Greece who would rule greatly and quite unopposed for a while. History again reveals this to be true. Alexander the Great was that mighty king. He eventually rose and led the Greeks in military conquest against the Persians and replaced the Persians as the reigning empire. Then the angel also prophesied that king's kingdom, that mighty king of the Greek kingdom, Alexander, that king's kingdom would be broken and divided up 4 ways. And yet none of it would go to his family heirs. That's all the stuff that the angel told him. And history reveals this to be true, as the Greek Empire broke into 4 distinct smaller kingdoms after Alexander's death, all ruled by Greek generals, none by heirs to Alexander by blood. And we talked about that in a little bit more detail than we might tonight back in chapter 8. In chapter 8, Daniel's vision there is being expanded upon here in chapter 11. So in chapter 8, again, just real quick, it was a vision of a ram being conquered by a goat. And that was interpreted for Daniel by Gabriel the angel as the Persians being conquered by the Greeks. As we saw there, and we have reaffirmed here, after Alexander's death, the Greek Empire broken up into those 4 kingdoms. And so those particular ones, Cassander ruled over Greece and its region furthest to the west. Lysimachus ruled over Asia Minor. Seleucus ruled over Syria and Israel's land, at least for a little bit, and Ptolemy ruled over Egypt and North Africa. And that fact, again, that kingdom of Greece being broken up into those 4 smaller kingdoms led by those particular men, that brings us to where we left off last time in chapter 11, picking up in verse 5, which we'll do in just a minute. Before we do that, though, it's important to say this, I think, just for your own good. The phrase, "and history reveals this to be true," is something you're going to hear just a few more times here tonight as we go through a study of the reliability of God's prophetic word, particularly in the book of Daniel. So don't get tired of hearing the phrase, because it's going to come back again. The degree to which the prophecies of Daniel have been fulfilled is absolutely extraordinary when you go back and take history, its events, its order, its people, its generals, its leaders in various parts of the world given in this kind of time frame here. When you look at that and then you lay that next to the prophetic word that we have, I mean, it does nothing less than absolutely astonish you, and it certainly should. That has been so much the case that there have been so many fantastic and specific fulfillments of prophecies in Daniel, particularly. That's so much the case that some scholars, and we actually talked about this when we started our study of the book of Daniel, there are so many specific prophecies with specific fulfillments to such an amazing degree that some scholars have actually taken to insisting that Daniel had to have been written after the events, to have such an accurate portrayal of things to come, and then followed by this, and then followed by that, and then this is something that else is going to happen, that some scholars have actually taken to doing that, insisting that Daniel was written after the events all took place, and then recorded in such a way to throw it back and make it sound like foretelling prophecy, when they say there's no way. There's just no way that it could have been written beforehand, because no one could know that. And they're not wrong. That's what makes it so fantastic. You're right. Nobody could know that except God. And that is the case that we have here. This prophetic way, we talked about this before, as I said, such precise timing in some of Daniel's prophecies, such specific details, that those who doubt the supernatural foreknowledge of God, and then also those who reject that God spoke to prophets of old in these kinds of details, in predicting various events in the future, those people are just left with claiming a late date for the writing of Daniel. That's all that they're left with, because the other option, they just can't stomach it. That it's supernaturally intended, supernaturally inspired, supernaturally and sovereignly governed over, and that is certainly what we take God's word as. The more humbling and awe-inspiring option is that God foresaw, that God communicated, and that is how God is. And that obviously lends very heavy credence and importance to the other prophetic areas of the Bible, which is another reason that they would push back against such a thing for the scriptures of the Holy Bible. Because if that's something that we can rely on, then we look at other things that the Bible prophesies about, and then those people find themselves in even more trouble. Because there's other areas of prophetic scripture yet to be fulfilled that have even greater ramifications for the world at large and for individuals in particular, specifically about end times, which we're on the very cusp of, and about the return of Jesus Christ and all that that means. And so they're left to just deal with that big, huge problem, or just go, nope, dismissed. And now I can, maybe not so comfortably, but now I can, ignore it and act like the Bible's not supernatural. So that is worth pointing out as a crucial pillar of the importance of the book of Daniel, especially since Jesus references Daniel in prophetic terms himself, which we'll touch on in a little bit. But and also in particular because there are so many parallels between what the Lord shows John in Revelation with what the Lord showed Daniel in the book of Daniel. And again, we've talked about those things already. So at any rate, let's go ahead and get started again in chapter 11, verse 5, where the angel continues to reveal future truths to Daniel about things to come after the division of the Greek Empire into 4 kingdoms. Because 2 of those kings are going to play major roles in the region, and particularly regarding the land of Israel, with those 2 kings being referred to afterward now as one of them is the king of the south and the other is the king of the north. So we pick up in verse 5, the angel continues to speak to Daniel and says, also the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes, and he shall gain power over him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion, and at the end of some years they shall join forces. For the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of her authority, and neither he nor his authority shall stand. But she shall be given up with those who brought her, and with him who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in those times. All right. Jackie, I should have said another answer to you. No, I don't want this stool. Yes, I want the other stool. I thought I'd be able to tolerate it, but I can't. Oh, that's better. All right. Verses 5 and 6, we just read it. Okay. Here now begins what we're going to see in this chapter, 11 in particular. We're going to see a massive back and forth struggle off and on between the king of the south and the king of the north. A struggle for dominion over this region here in the Middle East between these 2 kings and then their descendants after them, between north and south. With, guess who, literally stuck in the middle and suffering the entire time because of it all? The land of Israel. The people of Israel in between this tug of war. And that is the reference point, mind you. When the angel speaks to Daniel, remember that these visions are about you, Daniel, and your people and your time to come, right? And so when it talks about the king of the north and the king of the south, it's in reference to Israel on the map. So south, we just talked about it. The king of the south is the Ptolemies. That's Egypt. So we'll come to that in a second. The king of the north is north of Israel. That's the Seleucid Empire and the Seleucid dynasty, and that's Syria. And that's 2 of those 4 smaller kingdoms that the large Greek Empire was broken up into. Okay? So that's what we have here. Now the historical timeline begins to unfold for us as we connect the historical events and historical people to the prophecies revealed to Daniel. All right, so Ptolemy the first. He was the first king of the south. He ruled over Egypt, as we said earlier, and parts of North Africa. Here in verse 5, it tells us one of his princes became king of the north and grew in dominion over him. That's the king of the north, is Syria in particular, and that this one eventually surpassed Ptolemy the first in power. Then verse 6 said that at the end of some years, there was a marriage between the 2 kings in an attempt to, as ancient peoples often did, in an attempt to consolidate the kingdoms together in peace and so on. That's what happened. And so by this time, it was Ptolemy II ruling over the south, And this daughter that is mentioned, his daughter, was a woman named Bernice. She was married over to the Seleucid king of the north, who at this time was Antiochus II. But, as verse 6 went on to say, she shall not retain the power of her authority. History, again, reveals these things to be true because so that marriage took place after Ptolemy II died, after Bernice's father, Ptolemy II, after he died, Antiochus II in the north divorced Bernice and brought his prior wife back to him, and her name was Laodice. As you may understand or relate to, perhaps, or can at least imagine, probably imagine, not really relate to, she wasn't real thrilled about what Antiochus II, her husband, had done before. So history tells us that she had him poisoned. After he died, Laodice went on to have Bernice murdered too, everybody who had come with her as well, including even the infant son that Bernice had had with Laodice's husband, Antiochus II. So Laodice wiped them all out, poisoned the husband, wiped everybody else out, and then had her son Seleucus II placed on the throne there in Syria in the north. The prophecy shows that the back and forth will now continue with an eventual response from the south, where Bernice came from. Verse 7, but from a branch of her roots one shall arise in his place, who shall come with an army, enter the fortress of the king of the north, and deal with them and prevail. And he shall also carry their gods captive to Egypt, with their princes and their precious articles of silver and gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north. So the south we see here struck back, led by a person who is called a branch of her roots. Whose roots? Bernice's roots. Who are her roots? Her parents are her roots, right? You come from your roots. Her parents are her roots. The branch from her parents was her brother, a man named Ptolemy, not real creative, Ptolemy III. He, as it says here, history tells us those facts, he invaded and defeated Syria and their king Seleucus II, and as the end of verse 7 says, he shall continue more years than the king of the north, so that was indeed the case. Ptolemy III outlived Seleucus II after defeating him and taking power over the region again. Now the south has power. And Ptolemy III outlived Seleucus II by 4 years. Now, as feuds often go, as we've already said, this won't surprise you, this one's not over yet. Back and forth. Verse 9, also the king of the north shall come to the kingdom of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. However, his sons shall stir up strife and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overwhelm and pass through. Then he shall return to his fortress and stir up strife. History reveals this to be true, telling us that the two sons now of Seleucus II, Seleucus III, very good, and Antiochus III, those were Seleucus II's two sons. They are these sons mentioned here. They led a successful military campaign against the south. Between those two sons, Antiochus III was specifically recognized as quite a bit the stronger between the two. And so he's the one who eventually elevates to the throne in the north. So now they have just won a victory, but that victory was short-lived. Verse 11, and the king of the south shall be moved with rage and go out and fight with him, with the king of the north, who shall muster a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into the hand of his enemy. When he has taken away the multitude, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cast down tens of thousands, but he will not prevail. For the king of the north will return and muster a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come at the end of some years with a great multitude and much equipment. Okay, so then came now the south's response. This is under Ptolemy IV. He went out and he fought against, as it says here, the multitudes of the north under Antiochus III, and Ptolemy IV defeated them at the ancient battle of Raphia, and then he regained control over the region. But that was short-lived as well, because the north, as verse 13 says, spent some years mustering an even greater multitude than before, as it says, with a great army, and much equipment. And next now, through a great siege, the north will defeat the south again, regaining control over the area, and in particular, over the Holy Land in between them. But the north is going to have some specific help this time as well. Let's look at 14 through 17. Now in those times many shall rise up against the king of the south. Also violent men of your people shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of the vision, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come and build a siege mound, and take a fortified city, and the forces of the south shall not withstand him. Even his choice troops shall have no strength to resist. But he who comes against him shall do according to his own will, and no one shall stand against him. He shall stand in the glorious land, that's Israel, with destruction in his power. He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do. And he shall give him the daughter of women to destroy it, but she shall not stand with him or before him. Okay, history reveals this to be true, telling us that Antiochus III, now in charge of the north, he overcame Ptolemy V by way of this invasion of Egypt and this great siege. The particular help that Antiochus III had that time, as mentioned here in verse 14, was from the Israelites themselves. He says, the angel speaking to Daniel, he says, violent men of your people, Daniel's people, shall exalt themselves in fulfillment of this vision. They're going to place themselves up into Antiochus III's army and help him. They want him to defeat the Egyptian leaders from the south. Now in verse 14, the angel tells Daniel that those Israelites who fought with Antiochus III, that they would fall. And in verse 17, the angel mentions upright ones who are with Antiochus III. That means that the way that we would look at that then would be that the warrior side of Israelite support fell in the battles. But the political side of Israelite support for Antiochus III would be verse 17's reference of the upright ones, those who were with him for the sake of Israel, aligning themselves with him so that if he wins, yea, for us Israel, we're no longer under Egypt's control. And they were very interested in getting out from under Egypt's control in this fight against Egypt and the Ptolemies, the Ptolemaic Empire. That's what they want. They wanted to be rid of Egyptian control. And so they put their hope in Antiochus III and joined him, hoping that they would, A, win, and then enjoy some sense of freedom and rest from the constant battles in their land. However, he did not restore rest to Israel despite their help in getting him this victory, and their hope in him was betrayed, as verse 16 said, he shall stand, this is Antiochus III, king of the north, he shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his power. So he does a lot, unfortunately, after winning and regaining control, he does a lot to just kind of lay waste to the land of Israel in between. Specifically, when we look at history, we can see that what he most likely did that fits this would be when he kind of turned the soldiers loose. When soldiers win, sometimes they pillage, and sometimes they take stuff, and sometimes they enrich themselves with the things that with those whom they've defeated. Now, that's not exactly the case here because they didn't defeat Israel, but they had a disdain for them, as peoples often have. Near and far to the land of Israel, they have historically had a deep, diabolical disdain for God's people Israel. And that is exactly what they did. He allowed his army after the victory to enrich themselves at the expense of the inhabitants of the land of Israel. Verse 17 also said that the king of the north, again Antiochus III, that he would give his daughter to Ptolemy V of the south in an apparent extension of peace going forward. Yet, the verse also reveals that Antiochus' design in doing so, in giving Ptolemy V his daughter, his design was really to destroy the kingdom of the south through her placement there. You think back, or from this time period, if you think back to King Saul, and when he gave his daughter to David, The Word of God tells us that he did so hoping that she would ruin him, that she would be a stumbling block to him, and that she would be a cause of his downfall. That's why he sent his sweet daughter over there to go be a source of torment for David. It's a similar idea here. This man, Antiochus III, sending his daughter off to now go be, in some way, whether it's just through her influence in general, acting on behalf of the north, yet in the house of the south, or whether it's getting information from them to the Father, or whatever it would be. But nonetheless, that was the verse here, the prophetic verses reveal for us that was Antiochus' design. Send her, marry her to them, so that her influence in some way causes further destruction for the south, and it solidifies the rule of the north. However, the verse also says that it didn't work, because she would not stand with him, nor was she for him, it says. History tells us that this woman is named Cleopatra, not the famous one. The famous one actually descended from this one a good 100 years or so later. That's the one that you read about in the movies and Elizabeth Taylor and all that stuff. This is a different Cleopatra here now. This one, in history, was reportedly quite unfaithful to her Egyptian husband. And so her influence in steering Egypt into the north's tighter control ended up being quite a failed effort. So that's what we see that took place there as the angel tells Daniel things to come. In verse 18, the angel continues speaking of this king of the north and says, "After this, he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall take many. But a ruler shall bring the reproach against them to an end. And with the reproach removed, he shall turn back on him. Then he shall turn his face toward the fortress of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found." Okay, verse 18 starts, after this, after what? After giving his daughter to the king of Egypt in the south with the design to cause destruction, and it didn't work. So after that, it says he turns his face to the coastlands. What does that mean? We can look at history, and that helps us. The king of the north turns his efforts toward the coastlands. And it says even here, it says that he'll take many. He enjoyed some early success. Until it says he's stopped by one formerly under reproach. Then Antiochus III is going to return back to his own lands, and as verse 19 says, he will stumble and fall and not be found. All right. All of this was fulfilled when Antiochus III, again, after this attempt with the daughter and that kind of deception, he turned his attention overseas, not to the coastlands right there, but to far coastlands, particularly to Asia Minor, in the northeast, and Greece even further, to the northwest, and Greece even further to the west. In that area there, that is where the Romans are gaining in power. Remember, this is the fourfold breakup of the Greek kingdom, and we remember from prophecy, the empire that follows them is the Roman Empire. Well, it's the Romans that are gaining power west from here, and Antiochus III desires to make a move in that direction and go to battle against them. So the Romans are growing in power. Antiochus III turns his attention in that direction. He was helped in that effort initially by the famous military general Hannibal, who had previously fought very successfully against the Romans. But in this particular case in history, the Roman general Scipio, he defeated Antiochus there in Greece, and he defeated Hannibal too, for that matter. And in defeat, Antiochus returned, as it says here, to his former regions, having lost all that he gained. And as it says here, he dies shortly after that in a bit of a whimpering end. After this defeat, Antiochus III needed money badly for his kingdom treasury. And so what history tells us that he did is that he resorted to going into one of the towns he still had control over and pillaging a Babylonian temple. And it so enraged the citizenry that they rose up and they murdered him. And so that's how Antiochus III meets his end, as described here. He will stumble and fall and not be found. Antiochus III was followed on the throne of the kingdom of the north by his oldest son, Seleucid III, who is described next in verse 20. There shall arise in his place one who imposes taxes on the glorious kingdom, but within a few days he shall be destroyed, but not in anger or in battle. So this man, Seleucid III, now he chose to raise revenues. He saw how pillaging a Babylonian temple went to raise revenues, so he didn't do that. Instead, he imposed taxes on the glorious kingdom, the people of Israel again. But he did not last long on the throne. As it says here, historians have widely presumed that he was assassinated by his brother, who is Antiochus IV, and that is who the next verses talk about. And in his place, verse 21, shall arise a vile person. That's Antiochus IV. To whom they will not give the honor of royalty, but he shall come in peaceably and seize the kingdom by intrigue. With the force of a flood they shall be swept away from before him, and be broken, and also the prince of the covenant. And after the league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people. He shall enter peaceably even into the richest places of the province, and he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them, the people of the provinces, the plunder, the spoil, and riches, and he shall devise his plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. So these verses begin to tell us about this one who followed Seleucid III, his brother, and murdered him, Antiochus IV. This is Antiochus Epiphanes, one of the most vile individuals that history has records about. And so it's no surprise for us that verse 21 said, this person who arises is a vile person, a disdainful and contemptible person. Okay? It also says, though, with very little force he rises to power. Instead, what he has much of is intrigue, flattery, bribery, but not military force and not those kinds of things. As it says here, this vile person comes in peaceably. History tells us that he curried favor by the way verse 24 talks about, doing things his fathers and forefathers did not do, dispersing the spoils, the riches, the plunder, buying favor. Flattery, intrigue, money, riches, not military might, and not military pacts either, but instead by way of bribery and flattery. And he did that successfully with many kings and rulers in the region, including the Romans. He did this by way of flattery. Again, as if a vile person, if those words didn't tell us enough, we have more insight into his character there in verse 23 as well. It says that the covenants or the agreements or pacts that he makes, it shows us that he has no intent of keeping them. It says he acts deceitfully. All of these things he's doing deceitfully. He's not giving you stuff because he's your friend. He's not giving you stuff because he likes you and really wants an alliance with you. He's doing things deceitfully. It says, and then he eventually goes to battle against the king of the south. Verse 25, he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army, and the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. Yes, those who eat of the portion of his delicacies shall destroy him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. But these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table, but it shall not prosper, for the end will still be at the appointed time. History tells us that Rome helped Egypt in the south defeat Antiochus IV, Antiochus Epiphanes, in battle. And it's at some degree, in some sense, we see a negotiating table here in the middle of verse 27, saying that at the same table now, both kings on both sides speak lies. You may never have heard of anything like that, but that's exactly what happened in old times. This is how people used to behave when they negotiated with one another. Promising one thing but speaking lies, having no intention of keeping up their end of the bargain. And it says that they will not prosper, even their acts of deceitfulness and trying to get what they wanted out of the other side and so on. None of the stuff, none of the lies, none of the deception really is going to prosper. Now, after that defeat, the king of the north is going to turn his attention elsewhere. The defeat by the south with Rome's help. Okay, now the king of the north, Antiochus IV, Antiochus Epiphanes, turns his attention elsewhere. Because that business down here, that stunk. All that just happened down here in the south, that was bad. So now he turns his attention and anger in another direction. Verse 28. While returning to his land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the holy covenant. Earlier it mentioned a covenant prior to this, and that was covenants mean not the holy one, but just covenants between men, covenants that he as a king made, pacts, agreements, promises, okay? The holy covenant is a whole other thing. The holy covenant means one thing in the scriptures, and that means God and his people, and the holy covenant he's made with them to be his people. So he shall do damage to them and then return to his own land. Verse 29, at the appointed time he shall return and go toward the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter. For ships from Cyprus shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against the holy covenant and do damage. So we kind of have a repeat of what we were just talking about before. So he shall return and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. Okay, so again, after defeat, he now turns his angry attention toward the people of Israel and toward the people of the holy covenant. So the ships from Cyprus is the help from Rome that Egypt got. And again, now where it mentions the holy covenant, all right, that refers to the land of Israel and its people and their relationship with their God. So Antiochus Epiphanes here turns his attention that way. It has said 2 times now he does so and does damage. And now at the end of verse 30, it says that he shows regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. The holy covenant is the way in which God said to them and set up how I will be your God, you will be my people. And there is included in the covenant how it is that they would behave as his people, loyal to him, faithful to him just as he's faithful to them, and so on. Here is Antiochus Epiphanes adding more pressure on the people of Israel at this time, and it's important to remember what that was all in the context of. This is all in the context of the people of Israel at this time under enormous cultural, societal, economic pressure to abandon the holy covenant and the ways of their God and embrace the polytheistic, multicultural ways of the Greek culture, the Greek ways, the Greek society, Greek religion in general, that out of one side of its mouth said it was very inclusive. We don't have a problem with anybody's gods until we do. And now we don't like your God because if you're loyal to your God, you reject this system. And so you're not allowed to reject this system, which means you have to reject your God. There were some among the people of Israel at the time who gave in to that pressure and forsook the sacrifices, forsook the ways of the people of God, forsook the things that God had said to them, do these things and don't do those things as you are my people. And there were others who stayed faithful to God and his ways. The ones who forsook the holy covenant, it says here that Antiochus Epiphanes, he showed regard for them. Oh boy, he flattered them, he rewarded them, he made them feel very much like they were his friends, which we can look at this in retrospect and realize that they certainly were not. They are not friends of his, and that is how the world typically operates. Antiochus Epiphanes promised them peace, but he delivered the other thing, not peace. As he continued, as the world often does, it is never satisfied. Sin's not satisfied, the world's not satisfied, the devil's not satisfied. With any inch that they get, they want more. They want the mile, they want the 2, they want the 10, they want every bit that we would not have a firm foothold on in the name of Jesus. So he promised them peace and delivered not that. Verse 31, and forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary fortress. Then they shall take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. Those who do wickedly against the covenant he shall corrupt with flattery. But the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. History tells us that Antiochus Epiphanes set up an image of Zeus at the temple altar, and he demanded sacrifices to that image. And later he desecrated the temple itself by sacrificing a pig on the temple grounds. That is an abomination that causes desolation. Desolation meaning ruin. You can imagine that it causes the place to be unclean according to God's own word, and people won't come there to worship anymore. You think Antiochus Epiphanes is stupid. He might be evil, but he's not stupid. He knows those things. He wants to put every pressure on them to stop worshiping their God and give in to the Greek multi-poly, everybody in except your own way system. Says the people of God, people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits, right? I already said that the people who forsake the Holy Covenant, he corrupts by way of flattery. Said that already, we read that just now. But people who know their God and stay faithful to him shall be strong and carry out great exploits. When we were looking at Daniel 8 before, where this talked about that a lot, we read it from the book of First Maccabees, and we saw how it was that the horrors and the viciousness and really the reign of terror of Antiochus Epiphanes and what he did to the people of Israel, and at the same time revolts and revolution and a number of great successes of the zealots, basically, or the faithful among Israel, led by the Maccabees. And so that's what takes place here. The people who stay faithful to God, the Maccabees led a number of great revolutions against him and against his influence. Verse 33, and those of the people who understand shall instruct many. Yet for many days they shall fall by sword and flame, by captivity and plundering. And now when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help. But many shall join with them by intrigue, and some of those of understanding shall fall, to refine them, purify them, and make them white, until the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time. So a time of obvious great difficulty for the people of Israel under Antiochus Epiphanes' terror reign over them is further described here. People falling by sword, by flame, by captivity, by plundering, and so on. And I want you to keep in mind what it said there in verse 35, the description of those who stand, suffer, and in this case are willing to die for God's sake. It said, some of those of understanding shall fall, meaning that they'll die, to refine them, purify them, and make them white until the time of the end. Keep that in mind, because that's a particularly precious description of martyrs. Verse 36, then the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished, for what has been determined shall be done. We have a couple of important kind of clues here in the phrasing of the end of verse 36 that help us understand, along with other scriptures and history, help us understand that we have a bit of a shift in the prophetic here. No longer are we talking specifically about Antiochus IV, but instead verse 36 is a place where we begin now, where the angel begins now to speak forward of the one that Antiochus Epiphanes is a foreshadowing of, and that's the Antichrist. The person of Antichrist that the New Testament tells us about specifically in a number of places. Antiochus Epiphanes did quite a number of parallel things, had the same character, behaved in the same ways, but there are things that he did not do that Antichrist will. And this in verse 36 actually begins to describe some of those things. Okay? We see, first let's point him out. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods. So did he speak blasphemies against the God of gods? Absolutely, and no doubt. But did he exalt and magnify himself above every god? Not really. He put the statue of Zeus in there, right? And he demanded worship that, right? Worship Zeus and give in to the Greek system and just incorporate and join the family. But Antiochus Epiphanes didn't himself demand to be worshipped. He said, worship Zeus. So that's part of where we see this now begin to diverge and begin to describe someone else, okay, in time to come, who did some of these things that Antiochus Epiphanes did not do. So the one to come will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and will prosper till the wrath has been accomplished. That's a good clue also prophetically in the New Testament, speaking of the tribulation time to come, wherein the scriptures describe that as a time of wrath. Okay? So that's a bit of a clue for us as well. For all that has been determined shall be done, is how verse 36 ends. All right, now, again, looking forward, how it is that we can see that this abomination of desolation, clearly described as what Antiochus Epiphanes did, this abomination of desolation is not the final. And we understand that prophetically because Jesus himself and the Apostle Paul and John in the book of Revelation talk about this, but Jesus specifically and Paul specifically do as well. So turn there with me quickly if you want to. If you don't, I'm going to read it to you anyway. Jesus in Matthew chapter 24, when he's talking about the signs of the times of the end, right? You remember that. The Olivet Discourse here, Jesus is talking. And he says, beginning in verse 13, "He who endures to the end shall be saved, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come." Those things are going to happen before the end comes. What are some other things? He goes on to say, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." So there we have Jesus himself taking Daniel's prophetic reference of the abomination of desolation, which was partly fulfilled in Antiochus Epiphanes, but not fully. Because Antiochus Epiphanes in all his time happened a good couple hundred years before the time of Jesus. And here's Jesus now saying, in time to come, leading up to the time of the very end, leading up to the time of my return, in all the tribulation and all of the trouble, here's a major sign for you to look for, he says, you who are in Judea especially. Look for this. It's the abomination of desolation that Daniel spoke about. So there is a still fulfillment to come, right? And Antichrist is that one who will do that. And he goes on to say, if you're in Judea, if you're in the field, the housetop, wherever you are, don't go back. Don't go get your cloak. Don't go into the house. Don't go get your friend. Get out of Judea as fast as you possibly can. When that takes place, get out as quickly as you can, because the anger of that particular individual after he does that particular thing in the temple is going to be upon you. And the other prophetic scriptures tell us that very thing. Here is Paul in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3. Speaking of the one to come. "Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day," the return of the Lord, "will not come unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who does what? Opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped." That's almost word for word what we have from Daniel 11 describing this one to come that Antiochus Epiphanes didn't quite do, but this man to come ahead for Paul's time, Antichrist, he will do those things. He'll exalt himself and demand that he himself be worshipped, which the other prophetic scriptures tell us he does when he sets up the abomination of desolation in the temple, stops the sacrifices and offerings, and says, "Worship me." That's what Antichrist does. So that he sits as God in the temple of God and showing himself that he is God, okay? So Paul then mentions that very thing. So there's a couple very specific things that we find here showing us that Daniel 11's vile person is in part Antiochus Epiphanes, but in full Antichrist who is to come. Antiochus was the foreshadowing of that Antichrist man who still is on the horizon. Verse 37, now back in Daniel 11. He, the vile person, the Antiochus Epiphanes' full fulfillment, which is Antichrist, he shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall exalt himself above them all. That's Antichrist again. But in their place he shall honor a God of fortresses, a God which his fathers did not know, he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and pleasant things. Thus he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain. So that says a lot, but basically we're looking at this Antichrist figure on one hand demanding honor and worship for himself, and at the same time honoring all that it says fortresses. All that mankind can do in his own strength, that is what Antichrist honors. That strength, that's what we're relying on. Our accomplishments, our intellect, our innovation, all the things that we can do. We have no need for some God up in the sky. We don't need fairy tales like that anymore. We can accomplish all that we need. And so on the one hand, it's let's worship what we can do, and on the other hand, he comes to a place where he eventually demands worship for himself, all the while blaspheming the true and the living God. In verse 37, there are a couple interesting things that some scholars have taken a couple different angles at interpreting, saying that Antichrist will regard neither the God of his fathers nor the desire of women. Some have taken this to mean that perhaps, and because we have a capital G here, the God of his fathers, some have proposed that means Antichrist will in some way have Jewish blood, that the God of his fathers would be one that he forsakes. So that's a possibility there that we could look at. It also says that this one will not regard the desire of women, nor any other god. That is what some also have said for a man who doesn't regard the desire of women, that he would be a homosexual man. And that's what some have looked at that and said that he would be that. The way that this world goes, the way that this culture is charging ahead, the way that there is an agenda that vociferously demands full acceptance of that, so that anybody who would identify as that dare not be challenged in any way, and certainly not from your scriptures and your dusty old God. So the agenda and the momentum of that agenda in our time certainly could place some credence in that particular interpretation, that he would be that. And as much as people already champion such a thing, champion such a lifestyle, it would make some sense if we do find in time to come that is something that is a description of this particular individual. It's a shot at interpreting it. It's not a for sure, but it's some of the things that some scholars have said when they look at this in the ways that the angel to Daniel is describing the Antichrist. Others have taken a very different look at the phrase not regarding the desire of women, and they've taken a very Israelite way of looking at it. The desire of women for all Israelite women was to be the bearer of Messiah. That was the desire of women. If you're looking at it from that perspective, every woman of Israel had that hope that they might be the bearer of promised Messiah. So some have taken it in that direction and said that he regards neither God nor Jesus. That's a way to look at it. Certainly that is true of Antichrist. No regard for the true and the living God, and certainly no regard for Messiah, Jesus, and an insistence on tossing that absolutely aside. So, those are some proposed interpretations for those scriptures, for these ways in looking at this one to come. Some of them, though, as we just said, in general will absolutely apply, as this one does reject all the things that have to do with the true God and instead demands that he himself be worshipped as God. He blasphemes God the entire way, just as the earlier visions Daniel showed. Daniel 7, Daniel 8, Daniel 9. Those showed us the character of this Antichrist figure to come: arrogant, godless, and blasphemous. So those things still fit. Verse 40, at the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, and with many ships, and he shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. He shall also enter the glorious land, Israel, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand: Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. But news from the east and the north shall trouble him, therefore he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many, and he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him. There's a lot that we can say about filling in some of the gaps there with other things that Jesus, Paul, and especially John in Revelation write to us about these things. Ezekiel 38 and 39 also help us kind of fill in the gaps for the way that the end times is going to roll out. When the end comes, though, we'll take the focus just on this particular piece. We see that Antichrist will be opposed at least at some point. These verses show us that. that he will turn his attention from where he is against the king of the south, and he will go to the north and the east. Where might that put him? It might put him in the valley of Jezreel. It might put him in that place for an Armageddon type battle. It could very well put him there. It eventually then goes on and says at the end of verse 45, and this is important for us to walk away with if we walk away with anything. He shall come to his end, and no one will help him. At this time, for those who are alive during this time period, it will certainly appear nobody can successfully oppose this man and his rule. It is hopeless. That's why the temptation will be so great for even the elect during that time to give in to the pressure and to the deception, if the elect could be deceived. Nonetheless, we are promised, as we are elsewhere, that this man does come to an end and nobody will help him. Verse 1 of chapter 12. What's going to be the way in which this guy is taken care of? Let's go ahead and finish it up. At that time, Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. And at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book. Turn to Revelation 20. We see Michael stand up here. We see that earlier Michael was the one who rescued the messenger angel from the grasp of the prince of Persia in the spiritual realm. Michael the archangel, who this verse tells us, just as we saw on the other side, that on the demonic side there seemed to be hierarchies, assignments, that kind of thing, principalities and levels of spiritual powers. On the evil side, it seems that there might also be something, and it shouldn't surprise us that there's something like that on the good side, on the godly side, and that Michael in particular is one who concerns himself, assigned by God, to watch over the people of Israel specifically. He has that charge, apparently. It says here, at that time, the time of the end of the Antichrist's reign, that's when Michael stands up. Chapter 12, verse 1 tells us. Now, Revelation 20, verses 1 through 3. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit, and a great chain in his hand, and he laid hold of the dragon, that serpent of old, who was the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal on him, so that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years were finished. But after these things he must be released for a little while. Then down in verse 7, now when the 1,000 years have expired, Satan will be released from his prison, and will go out to deceive the nations which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, whose number as is the sand of the sea. They went up on the breadth of the earth, and surrounded the camp of the saints and of the beloved city, and fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. The devil who deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where, Revelation 19 told us, the beast and the false prophet are. The beast is the Antichrist. And they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. So this way in which Michael engages very personally and very specifically in the end times for Israel's defense, for the defeat of Antichrist in particular, for the defeat of the one who empowered Antichrist, who is the devil. Michael's the one who chains the devil, throws him into the abyss for 1,000 years. And then after the 1,000 years, the devil is released. He deceives the world again, seemingly very quickly. They come against the people of God again, and God rains down fire, and that battle's over about as quickly as it started. Everyone who's found written in the book is delivered. In Daniel 12, verse 2, stay in Revelation 20, okay? Daniel 12, verses 2 and 3, and many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn away and those who turn many to righteousness shall shine like the stars forever and ever. So keeping that in mind, that's obviously a resurrection, some to righteousness and forever and eternity with God, and others to contempt and destruction and forever apart from God. Okay, back to Revelation 20, verse 11. Then I saw a great white throne and him who sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, standing before God, and books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged according to their works by the things which were written in the books. The sea gave up the dead who were in it. That's a resurrection. The dead in Hades delivered up the dead who were in them. That's a resurrection. They were judged, each one according to his works. Each one rises to a final judgment before God's great white throne, it says here. Death and Hades were even cast into the lake of fire, which is the second death, and anyone not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. So we have these extraordinary parallels that help us fill in some of the gaps for what Daniel was shown with what John was shown. And again, like we've seen before, many, many significant parallels. The angel continuing now to Daniel in verse 4, "But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase." Then I, Daniel, looked, and there stood two others, one on this riverbank and the other on that riverbank. And one said to the man clothed in linen, that's the guy at the beginning of chapter 10, who was above the waters of the river, "How long shall the fulfillment of these wonders be?" Then I heard the man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand to heaven, and swore by him who lives forever, that it shall be for a time, times, and half a time. And when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, all these things shall be finished. A couple of significant things that we see there about end times again. A time, times, and half a time is something that we see from John in Revelation, and we also see Daniel already shown that in Daniel chapter 9 in the 70 weeks prophecy. So we see that time of the end described in both places here. And it says, it talks about it here a little bit as to what that time is about. It says, when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered. Now that sounds bad. The holy people are who you think they are, the people of God in Israel. When their power is shattered, when everything that they depended upon in themselves. Paul laments about this in Romans, that they sought God through the law, but not by faith, instead self-righteousness. And so they missed it completely. And so does all the world when they go by their own way. The holy people will, by and large, be deceived by Antichrist because they're still waiting for Messiah, and they will believe that he is him. And the covenant that he makes, and the peace promise that he makes, and all that stuff, and the 7-year promise from earlier in Daniel, he breaks it halfway through. All of those things are going to take place. That time, times and half a time, the 3.5 years. Second half of the 7-year covenant. Second half of the 3.5 years, that's the second half of that, is called the Great Tribulation. That's when things are worst on the earth, and specifically worst for the people of Israel. And it will be to shatter their power. It will be to shake them loose from everything that's not God that they have trusted in. Just as God does worldwide, intending to shake people loose of whatever the stuff that you trust in and put your hope in that's not God. Don't do that. And that time period, that's why elsewhere it's called a time of Jacob's trouble. This time in which God is certainly dealing with the earth, but he's also very specifically dealing with Israel and turning them back to him. All of these things shall be finished then, it says. Although I heard, I did not understand. Then I said, my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Many shall be, we read this earlier, purified, made white, and refined. Many will die. That's what that means. Many will die. Many will suffer the fate of martyrdom for the sake of God. But the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. Those who are trusting God and believing his word and his prophetic timetable going forward, they will understand what is going on. The wicked will not. They'll just full steam ahead in their wickedness. And even in all of that, serving God's sovereign purposes in the ways that he has lined up things to go until the end. And now again, back to Antichrist, verse 11. From that time that the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination of desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,335 days. But you go your way till the end. Speaking to Daniel, for you shall rest and will arise to your inheritance at the end of days. There again, just a confirmation of the fact that Daniel's not going to see this stuff in his lifetime. Daniel, you've been shown these things. Seal them up for people at a later time. When knowledge increases, they will understand. Here we are. Daniel, you're going to go to your inheritance and your rest, and that's what's going to happen to you. And then you'll be among those who rises up to righteousness and reward later. One shot at taking a look at understanding what these time frames here are at the end. Remember, a time times and half a time is 3 years. That's 1,260 days. Right? We see that elsewhere in Scripture. Here we have, blessed is he who waits. No, let's see. That there is some time frame that's 30 days longer than the 1,260 from the time the abomination of desolation is set up. Now, that's not a contradiction. It does not say that in one place it's going to be 1,260 days till the return of the Lord, and now here it says it's going to be 1,290 days. That's not what it says. It just says after that takes place, there's going to be 1,290 days. And it doesn't say anything else. And we just go, okay. And then it says, blessed is he who waits and comes to a different time, 1,335 days. So that's 45 more days. We have not much of an inkling as to what in the world that even means. Where can we find elsewhere in Scripture something that takes place in prophetic nature that equals 45 days? There isn't anything. Some have proposed verse 4 of Revelation 20. It says, I saw thrones, and they sat on them. This is in the 1,000-year reign of Christ. I saw thrones, and they sat on them, and judgment was committed to them. And then I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their witness to Jesus and for the word of God, who had not worshipped the beast or taken his image or received his mark on their foreheads or on their hands, and they lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. What might some have said, maybe this time of judgment that the thrones are set up, that doesn't take the full 1,000 years, that maybe that is just an idea. Maybe that's 45 days. Maybe that will take that much time frame. Blessed is he who waits and comes to that. Waits, meaning endures. And this is just described those who, as we already saw referenced, who actually are martyred and die for the sake of God and for the sake of the gospel. So we come to the end of the book of Daniel with a couple of those kinds of things feeling kind of loose prophetically. And so I think that with great happiness we just say, we'll see. The other things that we can nail down with prophetic significance and confidence, we also say, we'll see. These things are going to continue to line up on the world stage. The promise that God gives Daniel would be the promise that he gives you who trust in him. So I'll read it to you. Go your way till the end, for you shall rest, and you will arise to your inheritance at the end of days. Let's pray. God our Father, in all the stuff you showed Daniel, it's no wonder that it had the kind of effect that it did on him, that he was absolutely pummeled to the ground in fear and feeling overwhelmed, in feeling weak and sapped of all strength. Didn't even know what to make of these things, that who is that glorious man who appears, and in speaking to him, it made him even more afraid. And these are extraordinary things that you've revealed. So we come to you, Lord, and we thank you for the things that we can connect the dots on. And we anticipate, Lord, just as Daniel 12:4 says, knowledge shall increase. We ask, Lord, that you would help us to grow in our understanding of these things and then grow in our ability to apply these things to the world around us, and to speak of you and of your faithfulness and of your true prophetic word for people in time to come. They need to understand the wicked are going to do wickedly. People will widely not understand, but those who belong to you will. So give strength, Lord, and help any of your people who were on the face of the earth at this time to do exactly what you said. Endure, wait, trust, and be refined, purified, and made white. Your word shows us that they're given white robes, the martyrs of Christ. Glorious. Having a special place reigning with Christ in the 1,000-year kingdom. That's awesome. So we just pray, Lord, again, that you would take now the things we've studied and read and considered in this extraordinary book of Daniel. Plant them deep in our hearts. Help us to grow and to want to understand these things further, to study, to learn, and to apply, and then to proclaim. We pray, Lord, that you would keep us faithful until we come to our end. And we say, come quickly, Lord Jesus, in light of all these things. For your glory, God. Amen.